It's after Easter, and today we start a new sermon series, a sermon series on the parables. A man went to work one day, but he missed his usual train. Taking a later train, he found that he could sit down on the less crowded train. So he arrived at work late but fresh. A mayor of a certain town wanted to celebrate the new year with fireworks, but the town's finance committee would only allow him a very small budget. So the firework display was rather poor and very few people came. Now, can you tell me the meaning of my stories? Some of you are looking a bit puzzled because you are feeling right now a bit like the first followers of Jesus, how they felt. Because the main means of Jesus' teaching was through cryptic stories called parables. And he did so without explanation, just like I have with my cryptic stories. So usually, the crowd was left puzzled and confused, probably all whispering to each other, "What's he going on about?" This morning we had our reading, thank you, Derek, from the parable of the sower. And of course, when we read it, and it's the same with all the parables, we read it in the context of 2,000 years of interpretation. And so we immediately start to think through what it means. And generally, we've got a fairly good idea about what it means. But we often miss the fact that Jesus' mode of teaching is really rather weird. Now, if you ask the average man on the street, I'd love to meet this average man on the street. I'm sure he exists somewhere. But if you ask the average man on the street what he thinks of Jesus, he'll probably say two things. He'll probably say, first, well, I think that Jesus was just a good bloke. And then he'll say, but of course he was a wonderful teacher. Unfortunately, neither of these descriptions matches the person that we read in the Gospels. Jesus certainly wasn't just a good bloke, someone who goes around claiming to have lived before Abraham, describing himself as the source of all life, is not what you'd call just a good bloke. But I'm focusing today on the second one, because Jesus wasn't even a wonderful teacher, at least not for the people who he taught back then. He was just plain weird. He taught people in these cryptic stories that everybody knew must mean something, but because Jesus never offered a meaning or an explanation for them, he left everyone in the dark as to what on earth he was going on about, except for his disciples, who he explained things later. So, what was Jesus playing at? Great teacher? Not really. Explains everything? Certainly not. Uses stories to make his point clear? I've heard that said. No, they didn't make anything clear. Very often he used parables not to make things clear, but to confuse, not to reveal the truth, but to conceal the truth. Now, in Matthew's version of our reading today, Matthew 13, it has an expanded version of the reference to the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. Jesus says, Matthew 13:13, "This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You shall be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving." So Jesus is referring back first to Jeremiah and then to Isaiah, and saying, I'm speaking to them in parables to confuse them. And in this, Jesus was very successful. No one understood what on earth he was talking about, not even his disciples. Now, of course, with his disciples, he did go on and explain things in private, but everyone else was just left completely in the dark. Why? What was Jesus playing at? Well, let me tell you what I think was going on, what Jesus' strategy was. How was he going to get his message across? His message was radical. He would shake the very foundations of first century Judaism. His message was also revolutionary. It was about the kingdom of God breaking into their lives. And his message was very unacceptable because at the heart of his message was that he, Jesus, was God. It was a message that demanded a response. You couldn't brush him off. You had to go one way or the other. And it would meet incredible opposition. So Jesus had these conflicting parties arrayed against him. Some wanted him killed, and some wanted him king. From very early on in his ministry, he was in serious danger. Of course, he could have come out day one and said, "Here I am, I'm the Messiah." He wouldn't have lasted 3 days. As it is, he only lasted 3 years. He had to walk a sort of a tightrope. One side, he was in danger of being lynched and forced to become king by those who supposedly loved him. On the other side, he was in danger of being murdered by those who hated him. And so he used various techniques to get across his message even while walking this tightrope. So one of them was he called himself the Son of Man. It was a cryptic reference to an Old Testament prophecy that nobody quite knew what it was. Another one was that he did all these miracles, and then often he would tell people, "Don't tell anyone." He kind of just hushed them up. I mean, what's that about? And then finally, and the subject of today, he taught in parables, concealed messages that were only fully revealed to his inner circle. Even with all this concealment, his message was clear enough, and fairly early on in his ministry, as early as Mark 3, verse 6, there were plots to kill him. Why have I told you this? Well, the parable of the sower is, in all three synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, is one of the first parables to appear. There aren't any parables in John's gospel, so we're only dealing with Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And it was put as one of the first parables because the parable of the sower is the parable about parables. It explains to us how people will react to Jesus' teaching. And as a result, why he had to speak in parables. It explains to us today how people will react to Jesus' message today. His message, his work. Here's Van Gogh's The Sower, based on Jean-François Millet's masterpiece, which was painted 40 years earlier. Here is the sower. Here he is. The striking thing about this painting, I think, is that the sower is mysterious. He's almost sinister, isn't he? His face is in the dark. You can't see his face at all. He's come out at dusk when there's nobody around. We don't quite trust him. What's he up to? There's something a bit dodgy about him. This guy could be a mugger, not a Messiah. And that's exactly how people were reacting to Jesus' teaching. And we're no different. For sure, we put a different gloss on it, but our inner motives are the same. Like in Van Gogh's painting, Jesus told parables not so much to aid teaching, but to get a reaction, to unlock our hearts. What's going on? What's he talking about? I'm not sure about him. How do we react to Jesus? People came with preconceived ideas of what the Messiah should be like. And they also had principles and lifestyle that they didn't want challenged. And today we come with preconceived ideas about Jesus, about Christianity, about the church. And we also have principles and lifestyle that we don't want challenged. And when we're challenged, we react in a variety of ways. And the parable of the sower details perhaps four principal ways in which people react. Let's look at them. Firstly, the path. Hard, completely closed, entrenched position. In Jesus' day, many were completely closed to Jesus' claims. Jesus was rocking their world, and they didn't want to have anything to do with him. Secondly, the rocks. They're prepared to listen unless the teaching contradicts their preconceived ideas. And then, when it contradicts their preconceived ideas, they get offended. The Greek word there is scandalizo. They take offense. They become scandalized by Jesus' teaching. In Jesus' day, some thought Jesus would become king to overthrow the Romans. And when they saw that that was not going to happen, the cry went up, "Give us Barabbas. He's more like the real deal. Crucify this Jesus weirdo." Didn't quite say that, but that was the gist of it. They were scandalized by him. Thirdly, the thorns. They were distracted by other priorities in their lives. Are you ever like that? Other things get in the way of your relationship with Jesus. Perhaps Judas was like that. He was one of Jesus' inner circle, one of his trusted, closest friends. He sat under Jesus' tutelage for 3 years. But when it came to the rub, he had other priorities, a different perspective. And then finally, the good soil. The people who heard the message, believed it, followed it, bore fruit. But they were not the people you would expect. They were not the respectable, seemingly godly, moral people. These people would not have been on the parish electoral roll. They were Samaritans who were a hated, mixed race, non-pure kind of half-Jew. And there were the prostitutes. Every respectable person knew that they were bad. The tax collectors, who were the kind of dodgy dealers, swindlers, con men of their day. Roman soldiers, who were the occupying forces. Fishermen, coarse, uneducated men. Shepherds, the bottom of the social scale. Jesus was not the Messiah they were expecting, nor did he do the things that they expected, or even have the type of followers that one would have expected. I doubt that Jesus is the type of Messiah that you or I would expect. For myself, I personally would prefer a respectable, probably middle class, certainly English in terms of culture, a lover of cricket, that type of Messiah. And Jesus doesn't quite conform to my prejudice, because I would prefer a Messiah who conforms to my prejudices, my worldview, my values. So the question is, are you prepared to follow a Jesus who doesn't fit in the box that I have pre-prepared for him? In the words of Blue Peter, here's one I prepared earlier, but the real Jesus doesn't quite fit into it. Much of the time, we want a faith that doesn't cost us too much, doesn't change our lives too much. You know, we'll give a bit of money to charity, support the church, providing that we remain still financially secure. We'll give it a bit of our time, won't we? You know, we'll come on Sundays, we'll say our prayers each day, spend a bit of time each day, but we still want a life of our own, thank you very much. I don't want to let go of my life. At what point does Jesus, with his demands, become scandalous to us? So Jesus attracted the most positive response from people we wouldn't have chosen. Yet God was at work in their lives. Shocking though it may be to us, they are the good soil in the story. Those prostitutes and swindlers and ruffians. How do you respond to Jesus? How far are you prepared to go with Jesus? Go anywhere, do anything, no matter what the cost, no matter what the scandal. If you've never been offended or scandalized scrutinized by Jesus, had your prejudices exposed, your worldview rocked, your priorities challenged, I doubt you've ever really met him. Perhaps in this sermon series on the parables, some of those parables will challenge our comfortable preconceptions. He rocks our world. And I have found some things very hard to swallow. Still do. He still catches me out. A word of prayer. Jesus, you rock our world. We don't want to follow a fake Jesus. We want to follow the real Jesus, despite the fact we find you deeply challenging. Help us, Lord. Amen.